Hey everyone, this is Annalisa with Journey to the Goddess TV, where I regenerate ancient feminine wisdom for modern women. Today I have my wonderful guest, Dr. Courtney Kleftis, with me. Hello, Dr. Courtney.
Hello.
Hi. So, brief intro here on Dr. Courtney. Dr. Courtney Kleftis, goddess devotee and queer feminist librarian, was born in Portland, Maine, and currently resides just south of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. She's always been fascinated by exploring the role of women and their unique voices in the arts, specifically opera, through her previous career as an amateur opera singer, musicologist, and later music librarian. In her current role as founder of the Goddess Foundation, which we will talk about later, she remains deeply invested in recovering and reclaiming marginalized voices and wisdom traditions, especially those of women devoted to the goddess and or divine feminine in a less than hospitable patriarchal environment.
All
Welcome,
right.
Courtney. So today I invited Dr. Courtney here to speak on a very, I think, important topic, which is there a right way to worship the goddess? A few months ago, someone reached out to me on one of my social media accounts and asked me this question. And I am just going to read the beginning of the question. And that is, she asked me, what do you think of those who reached goddess worship through right hand path instead of going through paganism or occultism, which would be the left hand path? And she went on to tell me that she really kind of doubted the way that she came to the goddess, which was through not occult or paganist pathways. My general feeling that came out of this exchange I had with her was all paths lead to the goddess, in the same way that all roads lead to Rome. I invited Courtney here today to have this conversation with me because both she and I have, I think, unique stories in how we came to know the goddess and came to worship the goddess. Before we get into our stories, I thought it would be important for me and Courtney to kind of talk about left hand path and right hand path for a moment to the best of our abilities. So basically, the right hand path would be the more conventional religious route. So maybe like if I were a devout Christian, I would be following very specific practices according to my particular Christian faith that I followed. Whereas the left hand path might be some of the more mystical traditions, perhaps, just not as kind of orthodox, mainstream.
Not as dogmatic.
Exactly. That's how I understand it from the bit of research that I've done.
Yeah, me too. The little encounter I had with it prior to discovering this question that your guest had was just in the context of the occult or magic and like dark, what is considered a dark magic, Luciferianism, Satanism, and I think is often demonized and misunderstood, is what constitutes the left hand path, breaking taboos, pushing against social norms, maybe a little bit more morally ambiguous.
Right, exactly. And so one of the other things that we both kind of, I think, came up for both of us is, well, at least for me, what I had learned about left hand and right hand path had to do more with my understanding of Buddhist Tantra. Again, when I was rereading through some of the material we were both looking at, it seems that in that tradition, perhaps well, the thing about like Buddhism and Hinduism especially is that they're religions of balance. You have the light and dark together. So
Mhm.
left and right hand are like the yin and yang, like complementary
You
and
need them
not right or wrong, right?
both.
I mean, I'm sure there are some people within those traditions that would view one or the other as wrong. But generally speaking, I like this idea of complementary, like you need both rather than one or the other. I think that that's important for framing our discussion about goddess worship
Mhm.
in the modern world in circa 2021.
She very much embraces both the darkness and the light, and one can't exist without the other. like you said, they're a complementary pair. There isn't like a hierarchy. There shouldn't be an imbalance between them or any sort of hierarchy necessarily.
Right, exactly. And I think because the goddess has been so suppressed in Western cultures that there's not a tradition for us to follow who have grown up in a Western culture.
Right.
Many of us have to come at it sideways or just like from a non traditional perspective, unless maybe you grew up Hindu, for example, and you grew up in
Right.
a tradition that revered the goddess.
Yeah, I think she very much encourages a serpentine path. Oh, to invoke the late beloved Carol Christ.
I know.
Nothing is linear. You spiral in and out and wind your way around ideas, relationships, people. For me, goddess is very much a shapeshifter and kind of a trickster. She doesn't like to be pinned down. So, based on that, I don't think she really works well within really rigid, traditional, organized religious structures or systems. I think she can be found in all religious systems. You just have to dig really deep beneath the surface to find her there. Like the Shekinah, I think, in Judaism, isn't she like the bride in exile?
I mean, I think yeah, she's the indwelling presence of God
Right.
within the Kabbalistic tradition, maybe.
I think so. Again,
Yeah,
I'm hardly an expert.
I know
I
just very little about the Shekinah, but so there's another goddess, Tehom, in
Mm,
Genesis, and who's etymologically related to Tiamat. And
mhm.
so there are people like Catherine Keller and other goddess scholars who say that that is an example of the sublimated goddess in the Hebrew tradition.
Right.
So she really is everywhere. She really is everywhere. You know, even if she's been suppressed, she's there
Mhm.
in her suppression. You know, you just have to know where to find her.
Will not be fully silenced.
That's right. It's because she can't be. If you really have like the left and the right together, she can't be. Okay, so we've discussed a little bit of the difference between the left and the right. And I'm just thinking, even like in our bodies, both serve us, both our left and our right
Exactly.
sides. So I was listening to something today, and he was talking about right-handedness within kind of the
Mm,
Christian mythos, and which leads to right actions and I think that that's also part of my issue with this whole right, like rightness. There's like right actions, there's right practices. So whenever something is right, that automatically means something else is not right, is wrong,
mhm.
right? Correct. Correct. So I guess that's where I go a little bit like when right is used to discount everything else.
It's very exclusionary or exclusive, and it doesn't leave any space for paradox, where two seemingly contradictory truths can coincide in tension, but in a productive tension.
Exactly. And that is the goddess anyway. I think she is that paradox. So I would love it if you could share with us your story and how it is that you came to know the goddess or to become a goddess devotee.
So I grew up in a very non-religious environment, very secular. My mom was brought up Irish Catholic and my dad Greek Orthodox. And when they got married and had children, they were like, neither of us are that invested in our religious upbringing. We'll just bring up our children in a secular environment and they can decide, which I felt was really helpful for me as a child because I didn't feel constrained by any sort of problematic or repressive doctrines against women in particular, for instance. The shadow side of that was I didn't really give religion or spirituality much thought at all. I mean, I remember occasionally, I was like a very sensitive child. I remember in long car rides, I'd be sitting in the back of the car and just pondering the notion of eternity. So I guess I was more of a philosophical than religious kid. And I'd be like, what is eternity? I couldn't fathom it.
Mm,
I still can't really, but I remember thinking, like, what is worse, dying and just vanishing, being nothing, or being alive forever and watching people die around you and losing them? I guess pretty deep stuff for a kid. But
yeah.
this all must have been lurking somewhere deep in my unconscious. And I had a pretty charmed life, great family. I was really, really fortunate in that way. So fast forward to 2012, the year I turned 25, my mom, who was otherwise extremely healthy, developed this weird infection in her bloodstream, and it proved to be fatal. She passed away really unexpectedly, and I have never felt so lost and bereft in my life. I truly felt when she passed, I mean, we were very close and we still are. I felt that a part of my own being, like my core essence, had died with her. And throughout the grieving process, pretty early on, I remember on impulse, I bought this book, The Goddess Path, by the late Patricia, I don't even know how to pronounce her last name, Monaghan?
Monaghan, I think.
Monaghan. And I didn't know much at all about the goddess. I don't even really remember what compelled me to do it at that point. I was just so lost in my grieving and mourning for my mom that I thought maybe there's some sort of cosmic way in which I can reconnect with her, even though she was then out of the body. It really spiraled from there. I began meditating. I began exploring Wicca and Druidry and other neo-pagan paths, and none of them seemed to quite fit, but I do find many of their practices helpful, like the calling in of the spirits or the directions, casting a circle. And in the process of reconnecting with my mom, and I would have dreams where she would come to me occasionally. Sometimes in meditation, she would come to me in a very nonverbal communication, but it just gave me this sense that she was all right and that she was still with me. I remember one night I was doing this meditation in my brief foray into Wicca, and I was trying to connect with my matron goddess. And I figured, it'll probably be Artemis, because she's a badass queer goddess. Or maybe Persephone, because of the Persephone, Demeter, mother-daughter, tragic loss story. But the being that came to me was, strangely enough, none other than myself. And I remember a few nights later in meditation, she came back to me, and I somehow sensed it was the same being. She had the same energy, the same quality to her, but she appeared as this really gorgeous, tall, slender, extremely pale, black-haired woman who had like a crown of stars on her head. And I followed her up this densely wooded mountain in my meditative vision. And we reached a very steep cliff edge. And she looked at me and communicated telepathically as if she was urging me to leap, to take a flying leap off of the cliff. I'm a very risk averse, very cautious person. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Not even in a meditative vision. Very suicidal. And in that moment, she just looked at me with this look of just such compassion, like she knew me from the inside out. And she was laughing, but not in a mocking way. And then in the blink of an eye, she metamorphosed or transformed into a ruby-throated hummingbird and just flew off the cliff. And that sort of inaugurated my relationship with the being I've come to refer to as my goddess self, my daimon. I suppose in more mainstream, like even New Age parlance, Christianized parlance, you would think of it as the guardian angel, that type of being. But she's not entirely separate from me. I've also referred to her as she myself, La Ninfa Colibri, which is Spanish for the hummingbird, nymph for the hummingbird goddess. So for me, a lot of my goddess path has been getting to know her on a deeper level, and in that process, getting to know and embody myself on a deeper level. And for me, this is like a form of gnosis, or like sort of deep experiential knowing. And I'm still, again, a very cerebral person. So I have moments of skepticism where I'm like, oh, this is all just overactive imagination. But then I encountered the idea, I think it's Henri Corbin. He studied Sufi mysticism, and he came up with this concept of the Mundus Imaginalis, or the imaginal realm, and suggested that imagination, I mean, there is daydreaming and make-believe, of course, but it's like a spectrum, and the imagination can actually be a portal into other dimensions, other worlds, wherein reside goddesses, angels, daimons, demons, fairies, any number of creatures. So that's sort of my highly unorthodox, perhaps left-hand path to the goddess. And it continues to take shape with each passing day. I connect with different goddesses who are connected in some way to she, myself, but autonomous beings. I had a really powerful dream with an Artemisian figure who may or may not have actually been Artemis or Diana. Almost a year ago today, actually, I think it was towards the end of August in 2020. And I had a dream with the Hawaiian goddess Pele. It's a very mysterious path to follow, and I've been learning to relinquish control or the illusion of control and just surrender to she, myself, goddess, whoever she is.
To your last point about surrender, because that's been a part of my process too. There's nothing wrong with willfulness, but sometimes I've noticed for myself, like I have an idea of how I want my life to look or how I think it should look, which is not exactly what the goddess has in store. They're not oppositional. So sometimes she'll just be like, I'm having problems making things happen. One time I said, okay, Mary Magdalene, I surrender. This was early on in my journey with Mary Magdalene. I am like a vessel for your will, your Shakti. And as soon as I did that, as soon as I got out of my own way, essentially, and let her guide me, I just surrendered to her. And then here we are 7 years later. I'm at the end of my doctoral process, pretty much. So yeah, there's this beautiful concept, I think, of surrender. And that's in a lot of traditions anyway. As Natasha had said last week, the problem with the word surrender is not the word itself, but how it's perceived in a patriarchal culture as a weak thing.
Like giving in or giving up, relinquishing your agency or autonomy.
Yeah, especially I think in the context of war, because we're so
Right.
domination, power over oriented and power over ourselves. But I want to say too, because I'm not sure I've heard this whole story about she, myself. So I love this image of this woman with black hair and the starry crown. Did she have a face?
She did. I remember she had vaguely purplish eyes. She didn't look anything like me. Like I'm kind of short and a little bit on the rounder side, and I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way, although I am very good at self-deprecation. She was just in some ways the antithesis of me. I mean, we're both extremely pale, but she looked just so regal and self-assured. She had this look of complete and utter calm in her face. I remember looking into her eyes. It was kind of like as if I were looking at the starry crown on her head, looking into a night sky, like these mysterious kind of hazy violet depths.
So we talked about the void earlier, and that was kind of the image that was evoked in my mind when you talked about her. With the starry crown was the image of the cosmos, kind of as the cosmic womb void, and space of pure potentiality. So I don't want to put that into.
Oh no, I definitely thought of her as sort of an image of just the cosmos itself, the embodiment of maybe the Milky Way galaxy.
Yes.
Years ago, I read a book about Sophia by Caitlin Matthews. I remember in the introductory chapter, it's an incredibly dense book that I really need to reread to fully digest it. But I remember one thing really stuck out at me. She was just musing on the notion of dark matter and dark energy being like 90 some percent of the universe.
Right.
And I think there was like only 4 to 6% of the universe is actually something that is measurable that we can even conceive of or measure. And that's already on an insanely massive magnitude. So she was sort of suggesting that perhaps goddess is the dark matter that surrounds the material world, and the dark matter is this cosmic void, this realm of pure potentiality, this life generating chaos.
Well, think about it too. In the ocean's like very similar, right? Like we've only
Right.
mapped 5% of the ocean, and the rest is this like unknowable depths, dark depth. But again, full of pure potentiality. So much life teeming in the ocean. I love that mirror there. As above, so below.
So below, indeed, yes.
But there's a part of your journey too that's led you to founding the Goddess Foundation.
Yes. This is part of the surrender story. So I am currently happily employed. I work a great job as a music librarian, and I'm working towards my library degree so I can work in more academic library path if I so desire. And really until I embarked on the goddess path, and it wasn't even like an intentional thing It just sort of happened, or she happened to me. I fully intended to become an academic music librarian in a college or a university. And that still could happen someday. I'm not ruling it out necessarily. Life moves and works in mysterious ways. But during my time in library school, a few years ago, I was taking a class about reference and research materials, and we had to create a library guide. And I curated one based on the goddess, reclaiming the goddess and the divine feminine. And I just poured my heart into it. And I realized in that moment, I could do something so much bigger with this, because I curated the resource partly for myself, my own past self, who back in 2012, when I began exploring the goddess traditions, because it is such a quote unquote left hand path, it's not quite as scripted or structured as many other religious paths. It's elusive. It's more difficult to find quality, rigorously researched material on the goddess. So I felt compelled as a librarian to try to fill that gap. And it sort of snowballed from there. I'm still fighting against a lot of internal battles of like, oh, should I just seek the more secure and stable path instead of going out on my own and trying to launch this foundation, which I'm in the process of launching. The Goddess Foundation will be a library, archive, and spiritual center that will start as predominantly, if not exclusively, online. And the hopes is to build this safe, vibrant space for women, non-binary folk, anyone who's interested in connecting with the goddess, even in her many androgynous forms. I'm just trying to create a platform for them to make their own voices and stories heard. So that's sort of the impetus behind the Goddess Foundation. And pursuing this, even in the very early stages, as of right now, is terrifying to my extremely risk averse ego self. But she myself has been pushing me to do it. It's been working out quite well. For instance, the last 2 classes I've taken in library school have coincidentally enough informed and shaped my ongoing work with the Goddess Foundation in mysterious and unanticipated, unforeseen ways. So it seems like she myself, who maybe is a fragment of the cosmos, is somehow guiding me on this path. And there are times, like you said, there's always a push and pull. But when I surrender to what she wants for me, even though it's honestly quite terrifying and uncertain, it feels right and it gives me life, if that makes sense.
The goddess, Shakti, right, in the Hindu
Mhm.
tradition really just means kind of like life.
Life
It's that
force.
life force energy. So that makes total sense to me. I want to go back a little bit to talk a little bit more about the goddess and how we come to worship her. I want to give a little more context because your story is just one of so many of women's stories. And I'm going to speak just specifically to women because, of course, men worship the goddess too. But the goddess can come to us in these like unique, very subtle ways. And that's her language. That's the language of the goddess until we're each ready. I've met
Mhm.
people who have had a book fall off the shelf literally in front of them. Not much different from your story. I mean, I don't think the goddess path fell off the shelf, but it spoke to you. Something about it drew
Yeah.
you in. She can come in visions and dreams, in flowers, like I experienced. Other kind of symbols in nature, or just like a reverence for nature. That is goddess consciousness and goddess
Mhm.
worship. I think any form of honoring oneself and honoring the divine within all life, all of these things are part of goddess consciousness. And even if you don't know that that's what you're doing, worshiping the goddess, that is part of who she is. So I would never denigrate coming to the goddess through these kind of circuitous left hand pathways. So again, I feel like there's really a both and. I think both ways are valuable, whether you're coming at it from a more traditional background, whether you're Hindu and you grew up Hindu and you come to the goddess that way, or like this woman that reached out to me, she said she came to the goddess through Russian Orthodox worship, or if you come at it from, a different route like we did. And at the same time, I think it's also really important, and I think you would agree because we've had these discussions before, that structure is also important. And one of the reasons is so we don't accidentally culturally appropriate.
Right.
Right? We want to be really sensitive. And the other reason I think structure is important is so we can actually learn to live goddess consciousness more deeply.
Hmm.
And in my worldview, structure is like the masculine consciousness and flow is the feminine. So again, it's those two, we need
We
the
need
balance
both.
together. Yeah.
I very much need structure. I wasn't ever attracted to any organized religions as a queer woman. The Christian church, especially the Catholic Church, felt really oppressive to me. Again, this is overgeneralizing because there are, from what I understand, really rich folk Catholic traditions, like worshiping Black Madonnas, worshiping virgins, a whole pantheon of virgins whose churches are built on the sites of like ancient Isis temples, for instance. But yeah, I felt drawn to the goddess and paganism because it was very much an unorthodox, unconventional path that was less dogmatic, but still structured. And I think that's where I found the sort of healthy balance between the two. It encourages you to find your own path to the divine, both within and without feeling like you need a guru or a priest or a pastor to be an intermediary between you and the divine. You don't need that. But I think in lieu of that, it is especially important to have structure and discipline. And I struggle with this constantly, being more disciplined about meditating more regularly. But I do think that, like perhaps the left hand path and the right hand path, the yin and the yang, they both go hand in hand and you need both. I guess pun intended.
Yes. I love it. What has goddess worship done for you?
So, goddess worship for me has placed me on a journey of, this sounds incredibly cliche, but it's true, of self love. I have always struggled with being extremely self deprecating, having extremely low self esteem for numerous reasons, really poor body image, and connecting with she, myself, and the many avatars or faces of the goddess Mary Magdalene, Pele, Ariadne, the mistress of the labyrinth. All of them have helped me reclaim myself as someone who is already enough. I don't need to try so hard to be so perfect, to be the perfect wife, the perfect scholar, the perfect employee. I mean, I still struggle with perfectionism and constant self-deprecation. I'm sure it'll be a lifelong process, but connecting with the goddess and myself as a tiny fragment of her, a tiny but really important fragment of her, has been extremely empowering and enabled me to move past a lot of really self-destructive and debilitating tendencies. I mean, not like anything really bad like self-harm, but just honoring myself as a face of the goddess currently in the human body and having an experience as a human. And that itself is enough. So I think in many ways that's been the most important takeaway I've had from this ongoing developing relationship with my inner goddess beloved, my daimon, she, myself. And another part of it has been reconnecting with my mom from across the veil. I'm not a psychic or anything, so I don't have the capacity to communicate with her in like clairvoyant or clairaudient terms or whatever that language is, but I just feel her presence. And I think connecting with the goddess as a life force that is eternal, undying, has helped me sort of come to terms with losing my mom in her physical form, because her essence too lives on. And I've had numerous bizarre synchronicities, for instance, on her birthday, that have reinforced my suspicions that she was still here in some capacity.
Right.
So I think reconnecting with my mom and embracing the divine within myself, but also paradoxically the human frailty of myself and just embracing that, not punishing myself for it. There is no original sin. I
Right.
don't need to flagellate myself for being stuck in this meat sack, this unwieldy thing.
That we also love. It's also our temple at the
We
same
do.
time.
It's a temple. It's kind of like the goddess both and. It's
That paradox.
back in paradox land.
So really what I'm hearing is that goddess for you is very life affirming.
Very much so. And especially as a woman, I think She has finding a face of the divine that wasn't a patriarchal, old bearded white man sitting in the clouds, dictating from afar and being extremely punitive and judgmental. That doesn't resonate with me at all. I think that prior to encountering the goddess and really exploring, I thought that was the only face of the divine.
Right, like so many of us. Which reminded me, there's this great book that we read in our Hebrew traditions class called God, a Biography by Jack Miles. I think everybody should read it because it kind of humanizes God in a way. But we see God in new terms that make more sense because so many, I think, traditions make their gods in their image. So it does that for the Hebrew God Yahweh, the God that shall not have a name, that his
Mhm.
name is Yahweh. Also, we had this conversation recently about conversion, and I had this
Mhm.
conversation with this fellow on the plane, and
Mhm.
he said, listen, like for me, I don't need you to believe what I believe because goddess consciousness is not about conversion.
No.
And as I say that, I think that your testament of what goddess worship, goddess devotion has done and is doing for you, you don't even need to try to convert people because it's convincing enough just through you telling your
Mhm.
story, and it's not exclusive to you. Like she is here for all of us. It's not my God versus your God. It's just like
Right.
she's here. She is.
Everyone must bow down and worship the hummingbird goddess, and she will smite you for all of eternity. I mean,
Buzzing.
hummingbirds can be fierce.
They can. They'll be like in your face. Where's my food? Worship me with my food. Where's my offering?
My ambrosia.
We also have this connection around hummingbirds too. Like I feel like they bring me across the veil messages too.
I guess just in terms of the question of converting or proselytizing, I don't think the goddess path promotes that at all. To me, on a very fundamental level, the goddess is about finding your own way to the divine. Like you said earlier, all roads lead to Rome, all paths lead to the goddess, or maybe not. They don't necessarily lead to the goddess, but to some expression of source consciousness, for lack of a better term. And I think we all have the innate capacity to connect with whatever that is. And I connect with it as goddess. And that's how we relate to one another. And I find that empowering. And I feel it's a reciprocal relationship, but I don't feel that it is the only way to live a spiritual life of integrity. Not that you have to be spiritual to have integrity necessarily, but I think this focus on finding your own path pushes against the whole notion of conversion because I value other people's unique embodied experiences of whomever whatever they relate to. They're all equally valuable and
Right. And I had this image in my head because part of the conversation I had with this guy that led me to say that to him, that I'm not trying to convert you basically, is he had asked me if any form of goddess worship was salvic, had this concept of
Mm,
salvation. And even though there are dying and resurrecting gods and goddesses,
mhm.
many of which predate the Christian God, the Jesus, as one of my teachers used to say.
Oh, Jesus.
I know. It's weird because on the one hand, I do feel like the goddess saved me, or she saves me,
Mhm.
but she's not saving me from hell or eternal damnation or from my
Right.
sins. She's just helping me live life more deeply. I don't know how to say it other than that. Helping me love myself, like you said. It
Yeah.
is cliche, but it's like the simplest and I think most profound gift any of us can have is to love ourselves. Can you imagine? I would almost be willing to bet all my money for the rest of my life that if every person had that experience of self love, there would be no more wars.
Wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, because I mean, again, not to get all Jungian, but if we ignore our shadow side, that sort of dark side of ourselves, which sometimes isn't even like repressed evil, it can just be a part of yourself that you, for whatever reason, are unwilling to face. And I'm still navigating my own inner underworld and it's terrifying, but she myself has my hand the whole way. And I think if more people had this relationship with something or someone, some consciousness, goddess perhaps, to help lead them through that labyrinth of the inner underworld. Like you said, there would be no more wars. We would be attuned to all of ourselves, the dark and the light. We would be fully integrated, and there would be no need to repress and then project our own self-loathing onto the world around us.
That's right.
Find convenient scapegoats or people to other and blame.
Right. And we wouldn't need to save people, with like convert them. We wouldn't need to
Right.
save them through conversion because there's nothing to save. I
Save.
don't need to
Yeah.
save too many because the underworld is holy in goddess consciousness. It's divine and it's a necessary part of our experience.
I wish I could have found my way onto this path without losing my mom, but that was my dark night of the soul, which I truly believe has propelled me on this life affirming and life giving path. I feel like it was just fated to happen that way. And the goddess doesn't steer away from or ignore the dark side of life. And in learning not to fear death so much, I mean, sure, I still miss my mom. I miss her every day, but I don't fear death as much. I mean, I don't look forward to dying. I don't plan on dying anytime soon, knock on wood. But I'm not afraid necessarily of being reabsorbed into this primordial chaos
Yeah.
or whatever follows after
After you,
this human incarnation. Yeah.
okay, so now Courtney is going to show us, or she's going to give us a sneak peek of the Goddess Foundation, which she will officially debut in September.
So this is in its early stages. I just began working on the website this past weekend, and this is what I have so far. I chose the color red for the color scheme because for me, red is a very divine feminine color, which I think Annalisa would relate to with her
Yes.
love of the red hibiscus flower.
Yes.
One of the guiding goddesses behind the Goddess Foundation is Ariadne, who guides the hero or heroine in and out of the turbulent labyrinth of life with her red thread. So I chose this as a color scheme, and this is Isis, I believe, or Aset in Kemetic. And I just chose her because she is one of the most iconic goddesses. I believe she had quite an extensive cult that predated Christianity and lasted for many thousands of years.
There's something too with the wings that are slightly reminiscent of the hummingbird.
Yeah, I chose a being with wings because I believe in the legend, in the Isis mythology. She fans the life force, the Shakti, the breath of life back into her deceased husband, brother Osiris, with her wings. I also view the wings as a source of comfort, like the goddess embracing you in her wings, enfolding you in them. So it's a source of security and comfort, but also it's empowering. It pushes you to fly above yourself, defying gravity. So that's sort of the story behind my choice of this image. It does indicate it'll be a library, archive, and spiritual center. And the only other page I have up and running right now is the About page. I have a mythical introduction in which I do invoke Ariadne. And there's a video you can click on as well, an image of a seaside Ariadnean labyrinth. And I envision that as anyone following the path of the goddess.
Yes.
Navigating the labyrinth of life with her help and guidance. I just have my mission statement here, and then you can click on Learn More, and it'll pull up a work in progress PDF of the full mission statement. And it'll include a brief overview of various initiatives I hope to offer as part of the Goddess Foundation. For instance, a Goddess in Everyday Life oral history, or should I say herstory, collection project featuring and collecting stories of community members by submission, as well as various workshops, for instance, dream workshops, activism-centered retreats, for instance, working towards animal rights, saving the earth, which we need in this era of climate change, and also work inspired by your own work, Annalisa. Goddess theater and performing arts. I would love to do someday a modern recreation of the Lamentations of Isis and her twin sister, Nephthys. And I think it would be really inspiring to have the Goddess Foundation promote and house and archive the liturgy and scripture, including performances song and theater art of all its members. These are just a sort of teaser.
Your vision is so incredible, and it really does seem to embody everything the goddess is about. It's supportive, it's relational, it's educational, it's creative, it's generative. It's a homecoming. It's a place to come home to the goddess. Whether you can come in person or come online, it's a homecoming.
That is my goal. And right now it's a one-person project. In the future, I'm hoping it'll be a sort of goddess co-op, a highly collaborative, non-hierarchical endeavor run by many people.
And you're seeing it here, everybody. This is the beginning.
Anyone who's interested in joining or participating, even in the early stages, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, and we will give that information if you want to reach out to Courtney in just a moment. So before we get to that, do you have any other goddess wisdoms?
The only thing that really comes to mind is just trust yourself, listen to your body. Your body cannot lie. And this is a lesson that I am learning through the goddess very gradually. And it is not easy to do. It's far easier said than done. I think a part of being on this path is learning to trust and love yourself, and to do so not just from the head up, but from the full body.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Courtney.
Thank you, Annalisa. Soon
Yeah.
to be Dr. Annalisa.
Soon.
You can do it.
I know, almost. Cool. So I'm going to have you share with the audience where they can find you online and email, whatever you prefer.
Sure. I had a very short-lived podcast that I hope to incorporate eventually into the Goddess Foundation, but you can find that online. I guess it'll just be in the show notes.
Yeah, link in the text box below. That's how you will find Courtney. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And to everybody watching, thank you for being here. If you liked this conversation, please hit the like button. Please comment. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet. There are so many amazing people that come on this show, and the more people that partake, the more that we can spread the love of the goddess around the world and change the world for the better. And if you want to support the channel in other ways, then I encourage you to check out my Patreon page, where you can become a member starting at the $3 Triple Goddess level. And at that level, you have access to behind the scenes footage. So if there are any outtakes to share from my conversation with Courtney, for example, that's where they be. And that's where you have access to them. Again, thank you so much, Courtney. This was a great conversation, as always.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Until next time, ciao.